Hello there to all my Momentum Influencer friends. I'm glad you took time to watch today. I'm about to have an interview with a man I've just met. He's from Australia. His name is Kyle Portbury, and he is a film producer. But this particular film he's directing, it's called The Hopeful, and it is the story, and it's a period piece because it's a story about the roots of the Seventh day Adventist movement. I loved this film. It told me things I had not heard before. I know you will be interested, so stay tuned for this chat between me and Kyle. My name is Jean Thomason, and this is Momentum Influencers Network. Hi there, friends. And as promised, here I am on screen with my new friend whom I've just met. And his name is Kyle Portbury, and he is the director of a soon to be released film called The Hopeful. So we are thrilled to have you today. Thank you for your time, Kyle. And I know you've been working in the film world and industry for a while. Why did you choose the subject of the history of the Seventh day Adventist to do for this particular movie? Tell us all about it.
Yeah, love to. And thank you very much, Jean, as well for having me on. I think that probably the simple answer as to why this story about the Seventh day Adventist movement, I grew up Seventh day Adventist, I'm a lifelong Adventist. And I think, like everyone, we naturally go through a rhythm of working out whether or not our faith that we get from our parents is going to be the faith that we take on into adulthood. And then when you get to your mid 40s, which I am in, you kind of start really looking at, well, okay, if I've chosen this now for me as an adult, as adult Kyle, and it's no longer the way I viewed it when I was a kid, okay, so what's important about that? Like, what's the core of that that is actually relevant and real and tangible to the world around me and the people that I interact with? And for me, that's really, it really comes down to what your worldview of the character of Christ is, right? And I think that's why this story resonated with me so richly, um, because that origin story, I guess, of my faith is really a group of people who saw a different character of Christ than what they were being presented with in the pulpit every week at that point. Mid 1800s is deep in a period of American history called the Great Awakening. So there's lots of people asking lots of questions about faith and God and Christ and his character. Um, and you get at this time too, you've got a lot of veterans from the War of 1812, which is not, it's not one of the more well-known ones, but certainly a lot of people in this era had been veterans of that war, and one of them in particularly, who miraculously survived an explosion. A shell landed in a group of soldiers, killed every single person around him, but didn't kill him, and in fact didn't even put a mark on him. He was left completely untouched when everyone around him died. So this guy, William Miller, was a gentleman farmer. He was also a deist at the time. So, he kind of had that philosophy of deism where, well, maybe there is, maybe there isn't a God. If there is, he probably set the world in motion and then left us to our own devices. Yeah, and so when he had this experience, he started asking, well, why me, right? So everybody around me died, and I wasn't touched. Why? And so he went to all of the great philosophers of the time, looked at Voltaire very heavily, but didn't find anything satisfactorily in there. And almost out of like a last resort, just to tick it off the list, he went, all right, well, I better read the Bible just so I can say I looked at everything. And in his words, he found a friend in Jesus. One of the key characters in the film, Ellen White, a woman of agency in the 1800s that actually existed and had sway in a man's world when very few women did. I mean, that in and of itself is unique, and I think like says something quite incredible about the power of God, right? Like he's able to use people that seemingly in that period of time wouldn't have been listened to, and yet somehow she was. And
That
when
is
you look
amazing.
forward to what Yeah, I mean, it is actually incredible when you look at what that, I guess, what she looked into when she heard Miller for the first time was
Right.
not Christ is coming back and the world is about to end, right? Like what she heard in her own words was, I've never
Jesus loves
heard
you.
Jesus described, yes, I've never heard
Right.
him described as a healer before. I've heard of his
Right.
wrath and his judgment, but his healing, like, wow, like literally wow. And so the
I loved
devastation, yeah, no, go for it, yeah.
I I loved that part of showing the women, the strong women in this, and even back
Mm,
to William Miller, that it was his wife
his wife
portrayed in
Lucy,
the movie who
yes,
encouraged him so much because obviously she had seen such a change in his life. For him to look
yes,
into all this Voltaire, all the people you said, and then to come to the place when he reads the Bible that he finds a friend in Jesus. I mean, truly, he was a changed man. And so, thinking about how his wife may have reacted, she in the movie is the one who says, "You have to tell people about what God has done in here. You have to
mm,
tell people about the Lord Jesus." And as reticent as he was, he listened to his wife. And then,
yeah,
so she was the strong woman. And then along comes Ellen, who has visitations. And I'll tell you who I thought of was Joan of Arc, who also had crazy
mm,
visitations and messages from the Lord. And they were spot on. And I thought that that was great how the Lord would choose to give his words to a woman and then they listen to her. So, and I appreciate the way that it was written and that you portrayed both those women in the movie.
Well, and I think what's fascinating about the way that they came across in the research, right? When you read I mean, this era, there's such rich correspondence between all of these people. So you're able to
Right.
read what they wrote to each other and about
Hmm.
each other. And so you got a really valuable and deep understanding of in any given moment, these people may speak to each other or they may respond like this, like with a fair level of like I can defend that pretty clearly, actually, because if you say, well, you know, how could they possibly have argued with each other? And you could be like, all right, well, let me show you the letters where I read them arguing with each other through correspondence between towns, right? And you see this like
Right.
beautiful. I think there's a tendency sometimes, particularly with people who are like the kind of the early members of a movement of people. You know, some of the Adventist movements now 22 million people globally. You know, so it's
Wow.
huge, and it started with a couple of people in New England, right? And so you look at I guess the charisma of those early members. It almost gets venerated, right? Like it becomes mythologized over the years. So like what are we like 160 odd years later down the track now? Um, I think what's been quite fascinating for people that have seen early previews of it who are Adventists is they suddenly realize these are just real people like me, right? Like I'll have fabulous conversations with people who are like, I've had arguments like that with my wife with a baby on her hip as well. And
Yes.
like we feel like we've got this thing that we've been like we've got a mission that we've got to do and it goes counter to having a family, right? Like sometimes
Right.
that drive that you have. I'll give you the perfect example of that. I'm sitting in a hotel here in Austin, and my family are in bed asleep in Australia, and we'll get up in a probably about now and be driving to school. You know, and so whilst you feel that you have this like mission of I have
Right.
my love letter to my roots that I want to share as widely as possible. I mean, you're sacrificing time with your family to do that, right? Like, so there's a
Exactly.
price to be paid for that balance.
And trusting the Lord to provide while
Yeah,
you're on that mission and while you are looking for ways to share the gospel, and if,
yeah,
as we would say, share the good news of what you've discovered about who Jesus is and that he does love you and that he does want to be your friend. And I loved that you said that even in your paper you said that this movie is for you like a love letter to your Adventist roots because it tells this powerful human story.
yeah. I think if you're going to make any work of art, right, like it better mean something to you, because if it doesn't mean
Right.
anything to you, how is it possibly going to mean anything to anybody else? But it can't be about you, right? Like it's got to very quickly become something that people sit in the cinema and recognize in these characters real people that do real things like they do. And they, like I
Right.
think one of the joys for me of cinema is that you get to spend time with characters who challenge and provoke you, right? Like they suddenly make you go, oh, if I was in a similar situation where I anticipated something and then the outcome was disappointing to me, would I persevere in the way that they did? Right? Like, so with all the other distractions on, right? They thought Christ was going to come back and he doesn't. And, many of them had sold their houses, given up jobs,
Mm.
now they're destitute. Now what do we do? Right? So,
Right.
with all of that distraction of life and doubt and struggle and strife between relationship between husbands and wives and families and kids and their parents because of this, how do you persevere and keep going on through this? And that's really relatable, right? Like we all have to have, it may not be you're anticipating the return of Christ. It may be that you're anticipating a Christmas bonus at work, right? And you've put a down payment on a car, and that doesn't happen,
Right.
and now you own a vehicle without any means to pay for it. That's pretty disappointing, you
It
know.
is, one of the things I really enjoyed was the way that you pulled all of those dynamics into a period
Mm.
piece. And how was it creating something that was a period piece and recreating their lifestyle of the 1840s, 50s, 60s? I enjoyed watching that, just thinking, putting myself in the place of a person who lived in those days without all the conveniences of our
Yes.
current life. What was that like?
Yeah, so I guess the way that you portray historical narratives is very much like you just find those relatabilities, right? Like there's lots of aspects of those people's lives, even in the 1800s, that are no different to ours, right? They have the same hopes and dreams and wants and desires. They've still got to put food on the table like we've got to do. And I think that that's what makes engaging with a character whose circumstances we may not necessarily understand, or that their circumstance may not be our experience, but their emotions and their desires are 100% relatable, right? They're the same wants and desires that we have. Like we want to feel safe, we want to feel love, right? We want to help other people and we want to protect. So all of these big, desires and emotions, like anticipation, you know, we all anticipate. And when that anticipation doesn't pan out the way we anticipated, we all get disappointed. And then the way that we respond to that disappointment is all sorts of shades of good, bad, and indifferent, right? Like that can be perseverance, and we just keep going and going and going, right? Because we know that like there's this beautiful hope at the end of that. And I think that that's really inspiring when you see people who really lived and really dealt with these big world-changing events for them. So Christ didn't return clearly, because here we are doing a conversation about it in 2024, and this is 1844 that we're talking about. Um, so what did happen, right? Like what went wrong? Like why was their expectation that he was going to return not met with the reality with him returning?
Well, I want to thank you for really explaining that, because that, as I watched the film and realized that they had this group of people had put so much hope in Jesus is coming on this day,
Mm.
October 22nd, 1844. It's going, and they stood in their fields and waited for him.
Which
And
seems
and
crazy to us, right? In
I
2024, we're like, why would you do that?
well,
That's
and yet
absolute madness.
right there, but there have been people since then who
Yeah,
said the same thing. It's this date, it's this date, and before then who said it's this date, at this date. This is nothing new in
no,
Christendom. And
yes,
but the beautiful picture that you painted with this film, in my opinion, was you showed how they took that disappointment and said, "Well, we missed it. We're fallible people," and yet
yeah,
that doesn't that doesn't negate anything we've talked about the character of the Lord Jesus and the love of God in our
Correct.
lives.
Yeah.
And they, as you said, they persevered, they're pushed through, and especially using the women. And I appreciate that so much that Ellen, who heard from the Lord, and those women, who worked with and did the printing and all the things. So I was hopeful. Let me just say that.
That's
You know,
fantastic.
I felt after watching the movie myself, I was like, this
Yeah.
is beautiful. And because my husband and I we're acquainted with the Advent healthcare system through friends of ours,
Yeah.
we've seen and they extend the healing hand of Jesus. That's what's written on the walls in the hospitals, extending the healing hands of Jesus. And how wonderful is that? Who doesn't want to go to that hospital? I do.
Right. I think what I would say just before we finish up, it's fascinating to me. I'm not the kind of person who would normally speak like this about my faith, right? And I think that's what's fascinating about the process of having to go through and tell these guys' story, is that you realize this actually is my story, right? And you go, why am I so afraid to let people into the fact that I actually happen to think that the character of Christ and that hope and healing that he brings is actually pretty cool, right? Like, why have I spent
Amen.
40 something plus years being afraid, or even, dare I say, embarrassed to say to people that
Mhm.
that's how I feel, right? And I think that that's a beautiful thing that you get given when you're able to tell the story of other people, is that they inspire you with their courage, right? And so
Right.
you sit here in 2024 and you go, like, if they could speak honestly in 1840s, 1850s, 1860s about the way they felt about how the character of Christ had affected them, then maybe I can do it in 2024. You know,
Absolutely.
it's not something
Well,
I'm generally comfortable with. It's not my comfort zone, and yet here we are having conversations about it. So it's fabulous.
we we are. Well, bravo. Thank you for your work. Thank you for um, doing what you have done. And I love how God just takes all our gifts. And you know, the scripture says in
Yeah,
Proverbs that our gifts are making a way for us. And clearly, Kyle, your gifts have made a way for you to tell this story in such a way that the hopeful will encourage others to do what you're doing, which is be bold about your faith. And if not, be interested enough to go looking to
exactly.
see if this
Yeah,
so changed the lives of these people in this film. Perhaps it could change my life, and that's what we can do, is just we can be a witness and tell others. Thank you for doing just that, and thank you so much for your time, Kyle. God bless you and all the new stuff that you're doing. And also be on the lookout, friends, that this will be in theaters April 17. We are looking forward to it. Thank you, Kyle, so much. God
nice.
bless you.
Thank you. And we're hopeful to see you there at the cinema.
Yay, we're hopeful.
Nice.
That's
So
great.
stay hopeful, guys. Thank you very much, Jean.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.